Today is another episode in our Classics of Coffee series, and today we're going to be looking at this particular brewer, the vacuum pot, or siphon. Now, I get it, this is perhaps the most entertaining and theatrical of all coffee brewers. A lot of people who end up buying these buy these because they watched someone make coffee with one and they loved it, not necessarily because they loved the coffee that it brewed. And often they'll end up taking them home, using them a few times, become a little frustrated, and grow to accept that they bought a very beautiful coffee decoration rather than a functional coffee brewer. And I get it, I really do. This is probably as close as you're going to get to that scene in Breaking Bad where they have the ridiculous coffee contraptions. You want something like that. As an aside, that setup in Breaking Bad doesn't make coffee. It's not real, it's not practical. You couldn't brew coffee with it, it doesn't make any sense. The whole scene's a bit weird and mostly nonsense if you ask me. We're not going to talk about it today. If we really need to talk about it, you let me know in the comments down below. Let's move on. Now, the siphon isn't, for most people, a kind of daily driver of a coffee brewer, but it did used to be back in the past, and we'll get to that, because today we're going to run through the history of the siphon brewer. And then we'll get into the way that it brews, because it is different. It is quite notably different to other brew methods. And I do want to talk you through the complexities and intricacies and weirdnesses of how it brews. In the future, we are going to make an ultimate technique for this thing. And so there's a bunch of stuff we're going to need to explore. And we'll kind of touch on some of the variables involved in this thing. If you go looking, there are a lot of patents for early siphon brewers. And it would seem pretty difficult to pick who exactly was first. I suspect there's a little bit of a case of sort of simultaneous invention going on where a bunch of people had the same idea and worked towards it independently. The way that they work is pretty simple, I'll use this modern one here to demonstrate. You'll always have these two chambers, a lower chamber and an upper chamber. Now you're going to put your water in the lower chamber and heat it up. In the past, you would have used a spirit burner. Something like this, where you'd have had your fuel in the bottom, a little wick, you'd light this, you'd have a heat source. Now, this would heat the water in the base section until it got close to boiling. Then you'd want to make sure that this section was sealed. Here we use this top chamber. Once it's sealed, the steam that's being generated as the water starts to boil can't go anywhere, so it generates a bit of pressure here, and that pressure pushes the water down and up through the tube in the middle, up into the top section. And this is where you add your coffee. So the water and the coffee hang out here, they brew, and when you're finished brewing, with a spirit burner, you just put the lid on it, get rid of the heat source, and this would begin to cool down. And the steam would then condense, and that would create a mild vacuum, hence the name vacuum pot. And that would begin to pull the liquid back down from the top chamber to the bottom chamber, through some sort of filter. It might be metal, in this case it's cloth, but either way it's going to strain the grounds out and your brewed coffee liquid ends up in the base. Ta-da! You've made coffee. Now, these were originally called vacuum pots for fairly obvious reasons, but they were also called siphons relatively early on. The word siphon comes from the Greek word, which basically means tube, so it's really referencing the fact that there's a tube in the brewer somewhere. These days, most of us associate siphoning with moving liquid against gravity through a tube in order to steal fuel from someone's car. This brewer doesn't do that, but it has a tube. Through the 1800s, patents for this thing would come thick and fast, even though the mechanism, the way that it works, doesn't really change from its inception until today. A lot of patents were actually around kind of cosmetic innovations for this thing, because quite early on, I think people understood that this was a coffee brewer that didn't really belong in the kitchen. You'll see a lot of sort of early brewers are extremely decorative, beautiful things. This was coffee brewing to show off. I think people got the theatre piece of siphon brewing really early on. Another thing to note when it comes to materials is that the early ones of these, especially the early glass ones of these, would have used conventional glass, not modern heat-proof glass. And so they were way more fragile. You'd have to worry about how much water might be in the bottom section here. If you let that run too dry, it was the end of the glass. Like it was not heat-proof, shock-proof. It was very fragile. And so you see other materials being used in early siphon brewers too. Now, one of the challenges that they sought to sort of overcome quite early on was some level of automation. This led to the sort of creation of a type of siphon brewer that people find very compelling, particularly on YouTube. And those are called balance brewers. Now here, the two chambers are side by side instead of stacked on top of each other. You have your spirit sort of lamp underneath the first chamber, I suppose, and it's on a balance. So as it heats up and water boils, the water is pushed across into the brewing chamber through a kind of long drinking straw, and it infuses there for a little while, but as enough water leaves the bottom chamber, it lifts up, allowing the lid to close on the spirit burner, thus automating the shut-off. It begins to cool, drinks the coffee back through the straw, and you can then tap off your brew at the end of it. They were incredibly compelling visually, really fun to watch, and they still are. But unfortunately, I would say, balanced brewers don't make the best tasting coffee for a few reasons that will make more sense over the course of this series on siphon brewing. But they were popular because of how they looked. What I really loved is the innovation that moved those into locomotive coffee brewers. People made coffee brewers look like little trains. People really love trains, and they love coffee, so this is kind of amazing. I would love to find an old coffee locomotive to own one of those. I don't want a balanced brewer, I want the coffee train. Despite the fact that these things are unquestionably a little bit finicky and a little bit fragile, they did grow in popularity, particularly in Europe and North America, right into the 20th century, and persisted until there were some significant innovations. The first one being heat-proof glass. Pyrex. I think the first really popular brewer using that was called the Silex brewer. Slightly bizarre name, with a slightly bizarre story. Some would claim that Silex is taken from the following sentence. Sanitary and interesting method of making luscious coffee, it is easy to operate on account of it being X-ray transparent. Also worth noting, Silex did make a 7-foot tall, apparently working coffee brewer for the New York World's Fair in 1939. Frustratingly, I can find no image of it or any proof that they actually used it to make coffee, but they definitely made one. And also in the 1930s, we get one other really interesting innovation called the glass filter. It's a funny one, I'll explain it, share how it works, because it is really cool. Now, this was first patented, I think, by Harvey Corey in 1939, but he was not the inventor. That was Raymond Kell of the Macbeth Evans Glass Company in 1932. Silex would patent their version in 1946. Now, Harvey Corey had a line of brewers called Corey Brewers. I have a glass filter, but from a UK manufacturer of the time called Kona. It's very confusing. Let me show you what they look like. But I'm not going to show you the whole brewer, because, well, I broke it. I broke it like 5 minutes before filming this video. And now it's sharp and dangerous and unusable. But the glass filter is still a thing I can show you. And that's this. Here it is. This is the magnificence of the innovation. And looking at it, certainly from where you are, you can't see why this is clever. If you look closely at these, you'll see there's a sort of texture to this part of the glass. So when it sits in the top chamber, it can't form a perfect seal against the smooth glass. That means at the end of brewing, when the vacuum pressure is pulling the liquid through the filter, well, the brewed coffee liquid can get through, but the gaps are so small that ground coffee can't. So you have a very easy to clean, completely reusable filter that actually does a pretty good job of filtering out the ground coffee from the liquid. These are pretty cool. These persisted for really quite a long time afterwards, and it's surprising you don't see them today really anymore. We've kind of fully transitioned to cloth and paper. But despite innovations like electrification, really from the 1950s onwards, siphon brewers begin to fade in popularity. You could argue it's things like instant coffee or more convenient coffee brewing methods kind of coming up, and certainly by the time that the Mr. Coffee cheap home filter coffee maker arrives, no one has the time or interest for siphon coffee brewing at home anymore, which is kind of a shame. However, siphon brewing sort of did persist in a few cultures, particularly in Asia, which is kind of interesting. Now, Hario, very old glass company. That was their thing. First of all, they were an industrial glass manufacturer. They would make glass for things like car headlights or other things like this, industrial applications. Hario themselves say that in the late 1940s, early 1950s, they were very much influenced by US culture. At that time, siphon brewing was definitely still a thing, and so they began to make siphon coffee makers. In fact, the siphon coffee maker was Hario's first domestic product, kind of consumer product, if you will. And it persisted Now, it's hard to talk about why siphon brewing persisted in Japan without getting into some sort of cultural generalizations, which I'm not hugely comfortable with. I can't really argue the fact that there is an aspect of Japanese culture that takes pride and delight in craftsmanship in a way that isn't sort of as common in other cultures, and that might be part of this. People liked people who were good at making coffee. This is a finicky way of making coffee and therefore requires skill, and that was appreciated and it persisted. Also worth noting is that the siphons that were made by companies like Hario were much smaller than siphons sort of made for Europe and the US. Those would go up to like a litre. These ones would often be 250 mils up to maybe 600 mils. So sort of smaller portions, which I guess is kind of interesting. These weren't, a household brewer. They were sort of, I suppose, individual brews. Whether that meant they persisted in cafes more than homes, who knows? Interestingly, the World Brewster Championship, ridiculous thing, that starts in 1999. One of the other competitions that started not long afterwards was the Japanese Siphonist Championship. And can I just say, I love the word siphonist. I'm going to be a siphonist soon, and I'm very proud of that fact. Anyway, that championship became the World Siphonist Championship in 2009, and it's still going today. There is still a long-lasting coffee competition all around brewing with this thing. So it's always held a certain sort of mystique. All of this brings us to the point where we should probably make some coffee. I think that's fair. That do the thing that is so interesting, compelling, frustrating, fascinating with this particular coffee brewer. Now, this is the first video in a series, and it'll be a 3-video series. The second video is really going to be diving into the variables of brewing to get to the third video, which will be our ultimate siphon brewing technique, which we hope will be the easiest, most useful way to get to delicious coffee with this particular brewer. Often, when we create these kind of ultimate techniques, we like to create a little print to go alongside it, and we have begun work on that already. And that will be sold through our store that is powered by this video's sponsor. Before we talk about them, though, because this video has a sponsor, there's a little coffee giveaway. So if you live somewhere in the world that I can reasonably ship you coffee, feel free to enter the competition down in the description below. Please know that if you do win, you'll get an email using the email address you signed up with. You'll never get a comment or a DM from me. That's where the scammers live, so ignore those things. But now, a short ad for Shopify. Now, I have been using Shopify as my commerce platform of choice since August 2008. Back then, Square Mile Coffee Roasters, we were a little fledgling business just getting started. And what drew me to Shopify was how easy it felt, how achievable it was to build a great website and start selling online quickly and easily. And here's the thing, Shopify has been a great platform for us to grow with. We still use Shopify today. We have multiple installs. I've built other businesses on Shopify because I know it's going to scale with me. I can send tens of thousands of people to a website at once. It's never going to fall over. I can integrate it into other platforms, other services to get everything I need done to run the business the way it should be run with our particular needs, whatever they are. Maybe you have an idea for a business. Maybe you want to be able to easily sell on different social platforms like Facebook or Instagram. Well, Shopify has you covered. And if you use the link in the description down below, you can sign up for a free trial. And you can see how it is to build your own store, start to sell online. Or you can use the QR code that's on screen too. Thank you to Shopify for sponsoring this video. And we're ready to brew. I have all my accoutrement here. I'm prepared. Anyway, we're going to be brewing using this as a heat source. This is a halogen lamp. When I got into coffee and when I first started using a siphon, this was the dream. You couldn't get them in the UK, and I craved a siphon because they had them in Japan and they looked really cool. I used to use this. It's a little sort of camping burner. It's all right. A bit angry, but you can tune them down. Today, I'm not going to use the angry burner, but this was, and still is, probably the easiest, most affordable, sensible way to brew a sort of siphon these days. Don't use the spirit burners they come with. Just don't do it. They're just too slow. It's too annoying. Anyway, I have a weird sort of nostalgia for this. I've brewed a lot of siphons in my life for paying customers. Back in 2010, we had a pop-up called the Penny University, where we brewed just sort of cups of filter coffee, no milk, no sugar, to the people of East London. And it was an experiment. It was a lot of fun. And we had a siphon on the menu at all times. So I know the pain of this thing, brewing it multiple times a day. It's not easy. And I'm also aware we probably sold a lot of siphons because people saw it and they wanted one. Anyway, this is the 2-cup siphon. I'm going to add some water to it. This water is already hot. Go to the 2-cup line, which is about 250 mils, because sometimes a cup of coffee is 120 mils apparently. And we'll begin to heat it up. One of the things to note about this, apart from the fact that it looks really cool, is that there is a constant heat source here, right? Like this is one of the few brewers where you're constantly feeding heat in. That's going to change the sort of temperature profile completely. Now, this is a smooth glass bowl. That's a bit dangerous, actually. So you should put in your top chamber with these little beads on. These are nucleation points. How nerdy. Basically, if you don't have it in there, there is the potential to superheat the water because it has nowhere to sort of go from a liquid to a gas. It needs to sort of cluster around these nucleation points. So it's dangerous, but with the little chain of metal things in there, it's nice and safe and it will boil normally. So here's one of the first decisions you're going to have to make in a siphon brewing, right? When I put this on, when I seal this chamber, even though the water is probably, like 90 degrees Celsius, the air in here will begin to expand. There'll be some steam formed. There'll be some pressure very quickly, and it will begin to push the water up before it's even boiling point. And by the time it gets to the top chamber, it may only be in the sort of mid-80s. Or I can wait, get it a bit hotter, have it come to a boil, and then seal the chamber and have that first water that goes up be that bit hotter. Once it does go up, we are going to need to reduce the temperature. We definitely don't want to boil away the remaining water that kind of can't make it up the tube at the start. It's so quiet, but also not. We're kind of pretty close to boiling point here. Let's seal the chamber, just gently. Now, very quickly, that pressure is going to build, and you'll see straight away almost, water begin to move up into the top chamber. There it is. Hello. I'm going to start to reduce my heat down a little bit now. Now you'll know that that first phase is over when you kind of get a rush of bubbles through the top chamber. That's sort of some of the air being pushed through. It means that no more water is coming through now. It's just steam and air being pressed through. Now, I want to bring the heat right down. We don't want too much activity in the top chamber. Now we're going to add the coffee. We're going to work on a pretty traditional ratio, 60 grams a litre. Now I'm going to add this and straight away give it a stir to mix it in. Now what you'll see is that it slowly will reform a kind of crust at the top. Now this again is unique to the siphon. Most of the time, there isn't this heat coming in, pushing everything up constantly. And so you can see very clearly now, a kind of crust has formed at the top. Historically, what I would do when I was brewing is break this every minute or so. Now, there's a lot of testing to do here. I'll give you this sort of trick that I used for a long time, which is to smell the brew. Oh, it's a nostalgic smell. Early on, the brew has a kind of piney, resinous aroma. And as the brew goes on, around the point that you tend to get to a pretty good extraction, it suddenly gets quite sweet and caramelly. Now, this is a combination of an infusion and percolation brewer. This is obviously the infusion phase. We can leave this as long as we want, but know that it's so much hotter than any other infusion brew. Right, even in a well-insulated French press, you're not adding more heat in, and there is constantly a steady stream, a small amount of steam coming through this, heating this up. It's getting hotter and hotter, and that smells very sweet. So I'm going to cut the heat. It will take a minute for this to cool down enough, oh, there we go, that it begins to draw back down. Give it a little stir. We want to make sure that the coffee falls nice and evenly. Oh, not great, not bad. So at this point, you can remove your top chamber. Back into its little stand that it comes with, very convenient. And as a priority, get the liquid out of the brewer, because the glass is very hot, and that's not what the coffee wants. So you need to get this out into a cup or in another carafe if you want to, as soon as possible. A lot of times we tell people let coffee cool in order to taste it. Here, let coffee cool so as not to sort of ruin and destroy your mouth. It is the hottest cup of coffee that you can brew. This is way too hot to drink for quite a while. The siphon brewer has some downsides. This one, perhaps the most annoying. You brew something that smells really good, tastes really good, but you just can't drink it for like 5 minutes. It's just so hot. Now, as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of variables you can play with in the siphon brewing. You can choose how much heat you're adding in through the thing here, how long your steep time is, your grind size, the number of agitations, the technique for stirring down, how quickly you want to draw it down. There's a lot to play with, and there's a lot to get right, because it's quite easy to produce a brew that might have a good infusion phase, but a sort of channeled or uneven percolation phase, or just an over-extracted infusion phase where everything's too hot or too fine and it just gets a bit angry and harsh as a cup of coffee. We'll also be looking at some other little innovations in the world. We did find one particular brewer that's quite hard to show you, but it's kind of interesting. Hang on. Look at this. This is a Kazumi brewer, and it's the same thing, right? Except you've got your, bring it like this. Here's your base chamber. You've got this middle bit, which really is interesting. Mostly it seems to just cause a drop in temperature between the liquid that you've boiled at the bottom and the liquid that ends up in this top chamber with this kind of porous filter. I worry about that because I'm not a huge fan of ceramic porous filters, but it's going to be an interesting brewer to play with, and unlike anything I've seen before. And just look at it. It's very exciting when the coffee goes through the coil. Very exciting indeed. I will acknowledge just quickly now that cleaning these is annoying, maintaining cloth filters is annoying. We'll dive into that whole thing much deeper as well in the upcoming videos. And that is the siphon brewer, or the vacuum pot. Whatever you want to call it, that's okay by me. And now I want to ask you, do you have one? Do you brew with it regularly? Did you buy one because you thought it looked good and then become frustrated? Are you waiting for a technique that might make it fun and useful again? Because that's what we're going to try and make in the next video as we investigate all of these variables, dive right into it. If there's things you want us to explore in that video, you drop us a comment down below. But for now, I will say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.